For The Real News, I'm Baynard Woods. The Office of the State's Attorney, which is in charge of prosecuting cases, is one of the most important positions in the criminal justice system and one of the few places where the public is able to have direct input into that system. I'm sitting down with each of the candidates to talk to them about the role the state's attorney can play in reforming our system. This is the third and final part of an interview with incumbent Marilyn Mosby. In the first interview, we talked about the trajectory of her first term from Freddie Gray to the Gun Trace Task Force. In the second, we discussed her plans for a second term. And now, we delve into some of the politics surrounding the race and some of the difficult cases she's brought to court. And we certainly live in a society with, as we're seeing with Me Too and all of these things, do you think that some of these criticisms that have come against you are sexist or racist or ageist? Or
I absolutely do. I can tell you that, being 34 years old, winning this position, beating out a powerful white male incumbent, my age, my race, my sex does definitely come into place. And when you look at the role of a prosecutor, it's one of the most important roles within the criminal justice system. They decide who's going to be charged, what they're going to be charged with, what sentence recommendations they're going to make. You cannot ignore, and this is something that I had to learn how to do, not to internalize it, right? The backlash, the misogynistic, sexist sort of views. You cannot ignore that 95% of the prosecutors in this country are white, 79% are white men, and I'm, as a woman of color, I represent 1% of all elected prosecutors in the country. So do I think that, some of the rhetoric, for lack of a better term, against me has to do with that? I do. There's been several occasions where, I've been chastised within the media. There's been occasions where I've been told, play nice, Miss Mosby. It's Mrs. Mosby, by the way. And it is what it is. I've learned how to deal with it.
Some of the police critics came out early on, but more recently, you've had some critics within the activist community, people who supported you in your run at first Tawanda Jones and then Baltimore Block and Kelly Davis around the Keith Davis case. And so some of the most vocal critics now seem to be other black women who are critical of specific things, of not opening her brother's case or of prosecuting. What would you say to them?
So what I would say is that, I have a great rapport with Tawanda Jones and the Tyrone West family. I have a great respect for their family. The fact that they've been able to bring a voice to police brutality even before there was a national voice is something that, I credit this woman with. And what we've sat down with the family and what we've essentially said is, hey, the most important stages of an investigation are in those beginning stages. Unfortunately, your brother's death took place 3 years before I got into office. And the investigation was conducted by a prior administration. So the things that I would need to contradict or to challenge my predecessor's assessment of that case, I don't necessarily have. And so if you have any sort of additional information that would contradict, his assessment, we are open to looking at that. However, that has not been presented. And so, I don't think that Tawanda Jones is critical of me as state's attorney. I think she is just vocal and about her the grief that she feels knowing that her brother was, killed by police officers. And they did get that new autopsy that showed that it wasn't a heart failure, but it was asphyxiation. Does that change anything? So again, I can't get into the specifics because it's still under review, but that in and of itself contradicts what a paid, medical examiner versus one medical examiner versus another medical examiner. Does that rise to the level of criminal culpability? And how does that rise to a level of criminal culpability when you have two conflicting experts who say something? Again, we cannot ignore that this investigation took place prior to my administration, and those assessments, those witnesses, all of that, the most important stages of the investigation, I was not a part of.
Right. And I mean, the other case where people from the left, as opposed to the right, are sort of critical is the Keith Davis case. And his defense that they shot him and then planted the gun on him seemed far-fetched back 2 years ago when the case first started being tried. But after the GTTF revelations that they were coaching people to plant a gun on someone if you shot the wrong person, has that changed? Or it's going ahead again, I guess, and right before the election. Does that change your
So what I
thinking?
can say about Keith Davis, and I'm not going to get too far into the murder trial because, again, it's still pending.
Right.
But the case that is already closed is that it was a matter of he was tried in front of his peers, a jury of his peers. And a jury of his peers determined that he was a felon in possession of a handgun. That gun was tied to what is now a pending murder case. So I understand, Kelly is his fiance and she's not happy with me, but my job as state's attorney is to ensure justice for Kevin Jones, right? It's not about Keith Davis for me. It's about Kevin Jones. That was the victim of the homicide.
Has your ability to trust the police officers bringing cases changed?
The acts of those criminals that were dishonorably wearing those badges aren't indicative of the entire police department. And we do have a codependence on the police department, which is how we're able to get a 93% felony conviction rate. However, I think it's very clear that, I've recruited mission-oriented prosecutors that get it. I want you to cross your T's, I want you to dot your I's, but your mission is justice over convictions. As prosecutors, we don't guarantee convictions, we guarantee the process. That's what took place in Freddie Gray, right?
So Ana Montagna was recently let go, and there was a statement when it was announced that she was no longer working with you, also that you had been contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office involving the leak from the Office on the Gun Trace Task Force. Is that what that was about, or can you say have you dealt with the leak in the office?
The press inquiry was actually whether a specific person was employed within my office, and that was a response to it. My office indicated that that person was no longer in my office. There was a second question as to the GTTF investigation, and what I informed the press was that we were, the U.S. Attorney's Office shared components of their investigation. They conducted this investigation, right? They've shared components with their investigation. I am unfortunately not at liberty to discuss those components, and that any questions with regard to any allegations or assertions that were made should be referred to them.
I mean, but as the boss of the office, do you feel, knowing that someone there was telling them, has it made you run a more closed ship, or has it changed the way that you run the office at all, just knowing that that may have happened?
Again, and you said for sure it happened, I would refer you to them.
All right. Well, thanks so much. It's been really good. Been really good talking with you.
You as well, Baynard. I appreciate you.
Yeah, you too.